Has mainstream media reported that story?
No, it's silence, crickets.
One of the main impetuses for the cancellation of the Romanian election was the idea that there were 25,000 TikTok Russian accounts that had somehow swayed the vote. Now, it was found out that these were actually Romanian accounts, and TikTok, in its communications with the committee, said it never found or was presented with any evidence of these accounts. Do you believe the narrative that they're pushing, or do you think that this really is about the Europeans noticing that they're on their way out and trying to cling to power?
X has become a pawn because Elon Musk is standing up for freedom of speech. One of the leaders of the Spanish left-wing Socialist Party, she said that she wants to replace right-wing voters with immigrants.
Do the Swedes have a red line where they would just walk away?
Well,
was this the week the true totalitarian nature of the EU was finally and brutally exposed? There's been a US Congress committee that has directly accused the EU of election interference. Now, they've used files obtained from X, TikTok and other social media accounts to show the EU has been heavily influenced in elections. During the Dutch elections, they appoint the Dutch government as purveyors of truth, known as authorised flaggers. Now, the Dutch government, clearly the people leading it, stood to lose power in that election. So there's clearly a conflict of interest there. The Romanian election, the results of which were cancelled on the basis of accusations that Russia had been using thousands of accounts to sway the result of the election there. But TikTok came forward, said it was never presented with any evidence, nor has been able to find any evidence of these supposed bots. So there's definitely questions for the EU that it has to answer there. But the continent's media is silent. Some would even call it a blackout. We're about to speak to Charlie Weimers, who's a Sweden Democrats MEP, which has more on that. This week we've also seen that Spain has regularised 500,000 migrants, which now, once they have their papers in Spain and maybe one day become citizens, they can go all throughout the EU. Now, a move like this affects us in Britain because if the Spanish, like what happened with the Germans in 2015, say, come, we can do this, then they come. But they don't always want to stay in those countries. Sometimes they end up coming to countries like Britain. It was also exposed that a Podemos, a left-wing Spanish MEP, openly gave a speech last week saying that she wanted to replace what she called racist Spanish voters with the migrants.
Quiero pedirles a las personas migrantes y racializadas que por favor no nos dejen solas con tanto facha. Y claro que sí queremos que voten, claro que sí, hemos conseguido papeles, regularización ya, y ahora vamos a por la nacionalidad o a cambiar la ley para que puedan votar, por supuesto. Ojalá, teoría del reemplazo, ojalá podamos barrer de fachas y de racistas este país con gente migrante, con gente trabajadora. Claro que yo quiero que haya reemplazo, reemplazo de fachas, reemplazo de racistas, reemplazo de vividores. Y que lo podamos hacer con la gente trabajadora de este país.
All of this speaks to a real totalitarian streak going on in European politics at the moment. So here's my conversation with Charlie Weimers. Charlie, thank you so much for joining us. The European Parliament in some ways has become a stage where every now and then the odd politician will become famous because they strike a chord with the ordinary Europeans that feel so ignored by the bureaucrats in Brussels. And I thought you would be the perfect person to speak to at a time when so much bad news is coming out of the continent. And the first thing I'd love to get your reaction to is your country, Sweden, has seemed to admitted to itself that it's had a problem with the mass migration that it's allowed in over the last 10 years. It's starting to walk that back. Despite this glaringly obvious bad example of mass migration policy, Spain has just now decided 10 years later that it's going to throw open its doors. We've seen pictures of queues, thousands of third world migrant men queuing up to get regularised migration status. What's your reaction to that?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. What you say is absolutely correct. Sweden has started to learn from its past mistakes going back 40 years when we replaced labor migration with asylum migration. But In the case of Spain, it seems like they're either unwilling to learn or just being cynical about the whole thing. And now Spain wants to legalize 500,000 illegal migrants. And we know from the past that around half of them will eventually move outside the territory of Spain, further up north to countries such as Sweden, Germany, but potentially also the UK through the boats. So this is a problem for the whole of Europe. And why are they doing this? Well, the writer Gad Saad, he talks about suicidal empathy, and I think that's part of the explanation that there is a certain part of the political class that just don't care about the consequences of their own decisions. That's one thing, but there is another part that is outright okophobic, that really has a self-disdain, and no one put it better than the leader of one of the leaders of the Spanish left-wing Socialist Party, former communists, if I'm not mistaken. She said that she wants to replace right-wing voters with immigrants. So it seems to be an electoral calculus behind this move as well. And in France, I mean, to point out that theory might not be unsubstantiated. Besides her statement, in France there is this expression Islamo-gauchisme, Islamo-leftism, but this might come back and bite them in the end. And I'm not only thinking about how Marxists helped the Ayatollahs to get into power in Iran, but I'm thinking about your own country, the UK, where at first immigrant groups were quite prevalent within the Labour Party, but now they are forming their own competing alternatives to the Labour Party in many councils, many elections, also to the House of Commons. So it's a very short-sighted political strategy of the left, and it's extremely damaging for the society, but also for Europe as a whole. And not only would I be worried if I care about social cohesion and a functioning society, I would also be worried if I cared about rule of law and free movement within Europe, because what will happen, obviously, is that countries with center-right governments will impose internal border controls, in the case of Sweden, towards Germany, Denmark. Germany will probably impose it southwards towards France, and France will probably think about the border with Spain. So this is a very, very damaging move.
It seems as though Europe can never agree on immigration policy. It's always sort of some countries want to do one thing, the other countries want to do another, and then now we've found that 10 years later it's switched. Now you work obviously in Brussels and Strasbourg. You come across these people, and I just wonder, what is the prevailing attitude amongst them? I mean, they don't have the excuse that the UK and Sweden had, where they hadn't tried it before. We stand as glaring examples of their folly.
Well, it seems like there is a certain part of Brussels that will never be convinced that mass migration can have negative consequences. They have started to talk about demography now, that the birth rates in Europe are too low, that we need a sort of replacement migration when Europeans don't have babies to cover the needs in the labor market. They don't bother to look at studies on how non-Western labor migration actually affects the societies in Europe. There are several of them from the Netherlands by Dr. John van de Beek. The Danish government has looked at it In Finland, there is a study, and they all show the same thing, that if you import labor migrants from the Western world and from certain Asian countries, Japan, South Korea, it works out pretty fine. They contribute. They are net contributors to our society in financial terms. But if you try to import labor migrants from other parts of the world, it will be a burden for the taxpayer. But they don't bother to look at that. And just look around, as you said, the UK experience, the Swedish experience. It's open for everyone to see what happens when these kind of reckless policies are being implemented. Yet, you see it in Spain, you see it in Ireland, you see the left in Eastern and Central Europe espousing pro-migration policies. They can't help themselves. So I'm not out to convince them. I'm out to replace them with common sense politicians, and I think there's a certain middle ground, though. However, that can be convinced. Certain liberal conservatives, maybe they don't care so much about the cultural aspects of immigration, but they do care about fiscal aspects, because some of them want to cut taxes or, get the economy going. So they look at those aspects, and I see now that the prevailing view in Brussels after the European elections of 2024 is that we need a stricter migration policy, and I'm currently myself negotiating the return policy of the European Union. I mean, for your viewers, might be interesting to hear that out of those who lack reasons for asylum, international protection, the EU is capable of returning only around 20%. So approximately 350,000 people, illegals, stay here every year despite having a return order or a return decision. They go into parallel societies, they go into criminality, and so on and so forth. And there's a prevailing consensus from the center to the right that we need to do something about this. Of course, the left is trying to dilute it, to water it down, but I'm quite optimistic that we're going to get a good deal on this. So there is a wind of change in Brussels, but it drives me mad, the fact that things really have to go downhill before mainstream politicians react. And it's almost too late. What are we going to do with all the Islamists, all the clans, the crime gangs? We will need to impose policies that we would not have thought of 20, 25 years ago. But, in order to save our societies and to save Europe, we need to be firm here.
I hope, and I'm sure my viewers hope, because our border depends on the security of Europe's borders, and I hope that your optimism is well founded. But just this week, we've learned that the EU has made it easier for ISIS terrorists to remain. It's changed its guidance for the Syrian country, saying that they have to have proof that someone's a terrorist, proof that they've committed a crime, in order to reject their asylum applications. And we've got I did an expose last month about the funding of the European Quran. The European Union has now made a deal to make it much easier for Indian workers to move to Europe. I don't know. Do you trust them?
No, I don't trust the bureaucrats in Brussels at all. But what we're seeing now is a political change driven by the voters. Parties that are truly conservative, not fake conservative, truly patriotic, are gaining ground. And for the first time ever in the European Parliament, you see a pure center-right majority. That has never been the case before. But these cases that you mentioned, the European Union Asylum Agency trying to point to the fact that individuals associated with ISIS might be politically persecuted in Syria. Well, that's a perfect example of the kind of bureaucratic inertia that you would see in Brussels. These directors that govern these agencies, they have been appointed in the past. They need to be replaced, and we will do everything we can to stop this. And as for Sweden, we won't take in any individuals associated with ISIS. Luckily, what you were referring to, these are recommendations, and we won't follow them. And we will start looking at ways to replace these leftist director generals and so on, other bureaucrats that try to continue to pursue a policy that has no backing among Europeans. So it takes time to, turn around the Titanic.
Well, I think a lot of people listening to this, I mean, our fundamental understanding, it might have changed since we left, was that the European Parliament was pretty much impotent in the face of national governments and the bureaucrats. Are we misunderstanding something there? Do you actually have a bit more power to affect change in Europe than maybe we think?
Well, the European Parliament has gained more and more powers over the years. I mean, back in the days, at the time of Margaret Thatcher, I think she referred to the European Parliament as Mickey Mouse Parliament. They made statements that no one really cared about. And in some aspects, that's still true. In foreign policy, the decisions are made by the EU member states fully. But when it comes to migration policy, and another example of the fact that the tide is turning is the fact that we're now in agreement between the Parliament and the member states and the European Council to establish new rules for safe third countries of origin, and a list of safe third countries. And why is this important? Because in this list of safe third countries, we're removing the condition of connection to that country. So before, you had to have a connection to be expelled to, let's say, Turkey. Now that requirement is no more. Meaning that we're legally paving the way for solutions such as Italy's deal with Albania to have a migrant center there, and in many other countries. So that's a very positive step. And what happened for the first time in the remit of migration here was that the European Parliament actually went to the right of the member states in the Council. It has always been a tug of war between a left-wing parliament and a more realist right-wing European Council, but now the parliament has moved. So that will empower governments in the council to push further for sound policy, not least the need to reform the European Charter of Fundamental Rights that is being widely discussed in the UK. More and more governments are now pushing for this, and I think that the Parliament eventually will be fully behind that push.
I think it's undeniable that there is a wind of change in Europe. I think the Europeans are starting to wake up to the folly of the last, couple of decades, and they want change. But for now, the centrist bureaucrats still reign in Brussels and Strasbourg. And that's why I think it's so important to kind of analyse who they are, what their problems are, because then people know if they want to replace them. And one of the ways that we find out about all of the problems has been X, and the EU has made no secret of its disdain for X. But what I think is interesting is it's the same narrative in every single country, including the UK. It's been the exact same words about problems with Grok, about purported issues with child sexual imagery, which no one would condone. But I think, Elon Musk tried to assuage the fears with that without censoring or limiting what people can do with Grok by saying, look, you can use it if you're a subscriber, then we know who you are, you're responsible, and you won't create that content because it would be so easy to find out that it was you. But they didn't really want to hear a solution like that, because immediately they went, oh, it's disgusting. Now you can pay for the privilege to create illegal content, which absolutely was not what Musk was saying. We've seen this week that in France have raided the offices of X, and obviously last week the EU announced it was investigating X, same as the UK. Do you believe the narrative that they're pushing, or do you think that this really is about the Europeans noticing that they're on their way out and trying to cling to power?
Well, in order to understand what's going on with X, I think you have to take a macro perspective on the whole issue. Just look at what the EU has been trying to do for years regarding the so-called chat control, which is a legislation originally intended to protect children online. But the solution that the EU proposed would have meant the end of private communication within the European Union. Despite, we just referred to the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, and private communication is enshrined there. But the EU did not care, because the means justified the goals here. But so that was one big warning signal that the EU is not really inclined to care much about the integrity of the citizens, and to care much about freedom of speech. Another example is the Digital Services Act, which is a legislation adopted during the last mandate in the European Union, stating that there should be so-called trusted flaggers in each and every one of the member states. And we all know what political color those flaggers usually have. It's not like they are campaigners for, Reform UK or the Sweden Democrats. They are usually to the left. And they usually flag center-right conservative content. So that's part of the picture. And in this, X has become a pawn, because Elon Musk is standing up for freedom of speech. And we now see that Spain is going after X and basically trying to reinstate the monopoly of the legacy media in Spain, which is a very worrying development. And I hope that more actors here in Brussels take that seriously. But what I think will maybe stop this development are two things. First, a popular reaction. People want freedom of speech. People don't want to see what what you're experiencing in the UK with non-criminal hate incidents and other sort of actions that completely go against the idea of rule of law and freedoms for the citizens. So these images from the UK really scare a lot of us. We don't want to see that in the European Union. So there will be a popular reaction. The other factor here that will play into the whole issue is the White House. I do think that the White House will react strongly against any attempt to stop X in the European Union, and it risks affecting our trade relations with the United States. So how can we afford to do that? That's probably a question that is being discussed within the halls of the European Commission right now. And I think that in the end, Europe cannot afford that.
One big story that broke via X, via the US House Committee on the Judiciary this week, was a big report into what it calls 10 years of European censorship. Now, the EU says it doesn't recognise any of these claims, but the claims made by the US are quite damning. Brussels, I think, has a lot of questions to answer, one of which is, as you say, you mentioned about trusted flaggers. Now, during the Netherlands election, they actually allowed the Netherlands government to be a trusted flagger. Now, I think anyone can see the conflict of interest there. One of the main impetuses for the cancellation of the Romanian election was the idea that there were 25,000 TikTok Russian accounts that had somehow swayed the vote. Now, it was found out that these were actually Romanian accounts, and TikTok, in its communications with the committee, said it never found or was presented with any evidence of these accounts. Now, that's not to say that they never existed, but it's to say that the EU definitely has questions to ask. I'd like to get your reaction on that, but I also want to know, that story mainly broke via X. Now, in the UK, that hasn't been picked up. Maybe it's because we're not in the EU anymore. Has mainstream media reported that story in Sweden or in other countries around the EU? Because I've not seen it. I've only seen it in the Romanian press.
Well, I haven't seen anything in the Swedish press, for starters, and I read German and French press as well, and no, it's silence, crickets, if you will, and of course it's a very inconvenient truth that is being portrayed in the report from the United States Congress. Now, we have known for a long time that EU has dedicated resources to promote an EU centralist view during EU elections. But this is new information, as you say, broke via X, and many of us will raise this issue in the European Parliament and demand answers from the Commission. And I think the Dutch example really underlines the need to take a critical look at this and to do away with the idea that the EU government, which I think we can call it now when we have a political union, the EU government is deciding that trusted flaggers should be imposed in every member state. It goes against the whole idea of democracy being something that comes from the people. It has turned into an idea of democracy being a project run by the elite to steer the people in the right direction, and that's a very, very dangerous development. So I hope this report eventually is taken seriously. I mean, sometimes it can take time. The grooming gang scandal in the UK. I mean, it boiled for many years, but it really exploded when Elon Musk raised it on X, and now it's one of the top of mind issues in the UK. So I have hopes that we will be able to really discern this information and to get answers from the Commission and hopefully accomplish a change. But for that change to happen, being realistic, this is one of the issues where the old center right, the Christian Democrats, they are cooperating with the socialists and the liberals. So we need to make further gains in the next elections in 2029 in order to really overhaul these laws governing this. But eventually we will. I'm positive that we will.
But it's always important in life to have a plan B. I mean, TikTok, some of the TikTok files, the Slovak election, it was flagged as hate speech if someone said there were two genders. I think it's important to realise just how oppressive this regime is. And there's the chance here that if the X were to be banned and control were to be regained over the information space, and there was the reinstallation of the, primacy of the establishment media, that these breakthroughs that you're hoping for might not happen. And so I'm wondering, as a Brit, as a person whose country left the European Union, do you think that there's a red line for countries that have some countries in Europe have a history? They know authoritarianism. They don't seem to be that troubled by it. France, Germany, Spain, even Italy, these countries have authoritarian streaks in them. Our countries don't. They've got long, uninterrupted histories of freedom. Do the Swedes have a red line where they would just walk away?
Well, it's exactly as you say, that Sweden and the UK really remind of each other in many ways. We have quite a common view on sovereignty, on freedom, and a distance. I mean, we're also not part of the continent, so that creates a certain perspective on the affairs in Brussels, the Brussels bubble. Today it's not a red line because people are not aware of the highly oppressive nature of the steps that some are planning in Brussels. I do think that it will add another layer to Euroscepticism in Sweden, but it will have to, be combined with a skepticism towards open borders, towards the fact that we are funding unnecessary projects in other EU member states with Swedish taxpayer money, and all these different things that created Brexit. So I do think that the EU establishment is shooting themselves in the foot by doing this, and if it really leads to the very negative effects that you were talking about, I do think that there will be a new kind of debate in Sweden, but not yet a red line.
Before we turn more to the policies that have been implemented in Sweden, as you've started to kind of change your consensus on immigration there, I just wanted to ask you, because a video went viral after the death of Charlie Kirk, of you in the European Parliament trying to hold a minute's silence for, after this awful assassination, which was refused. And you could say that there's rules around that in the Parliament, but then we saw them holding a minute's silence for George Floyd. What was the reaction like in the room to that? And, what did that make you think about the European establishment?
It was very sad to see that the European left could not take part in mourning the death of a loving father, a highly democratic person in the sense that he wanted a free and open debate because of the fact that he was a conservative. Now, I was not too surprised, I must say. This parliament also granted immunity, or maintained the parliamentary immunity for an Italian communist who went to Hungary with the so-called hammer gang to use those hammers to attack political opponents. One of the other perpetrators was condemned to 8 years in prison for that attack. People were severely injured. But the left had no problems voting to maintain her immunity. So when you discuss the issue of political violence, it's time to talk about the role of the left. So that was what that experience in the plenary of the European Parliament told me, and I find it outright despicable that they cannot mourn the death of political opponents. they clapped their hands when the left-wing speaker stopped me from holding a moment of silence. It's sad, but it's also very telling.
I think that there's a lack of civility there. I thought that overall there's those principles that you have between two people that are in front of each other. You know, regardless of what they think, that person is not presenting an immediate danger to you. Therefore, you treat them with kindness, respect and civility. I think we're starting to wake up to the fact that that civility is in short supply among the left. And I think it's quite scary.
Mm.
Yeah.
No, I agree. And you saw it in Spain with the socialist woman who wanted her opponents replaced with migrants. I mean, if you think like that, you're really not being civil at all. You wish your opponents to basically disappear, and that is. That is a precursor to political conflict, real political conflict. So I think the left should really look themselves in the mirror and ask what responsibility they have for the polarization of our societies. I think that the rise of new conservative parties around Europe is a response to the arrogance and the overreach of the left, and it's time for them for some reckoning.
I think Spain's definitely going to be one to watch. Last year there were riots about a pensioner that was beaten up by a bunch of Moroccan migrants, and I remember there was a independent journalist who asked a Podemos politician a question, and she said she was going to take him to court and lock him up. It's shocking. It's quite scary what's going on there. Now, as you say, this is all to try and stop the rise of the centre-right parties who want to change a consensus on all of these policies. And so I think it's important for us to have a bit of positivity and look to potentially what could happen if these parties gain power. And we've seen in Sweden that consensus has started to change. And I think the Sweden Democrats have played a big role in that. If you could tell me a little bit about the change in policy in Sweden, the Sweden Democrats' role and whether it's working.
Well, I joined the Sweden Democrats myself in 2018, so I came from the legacy centre-right where I had been active for 20 years, so kind of the same movement that you see in the UK now, from old conservatives to new, the new big party on the centre-right. The reason I joined the Sweden Democrats was because they dared to speak the truth about the problems with mass migration, and had showed themselves to be ready to govern, ready to take responsibility. And now we've had an agreement with 4 centre-right parties in Sweden to create a government, and Sweden Democrats, we have a supply and confidence agreement with those parties, and if we win this fall, we are ready to enter the government as cabinet ministers. And what has been done? Well, the focus has been on crime policy and migration policy. If I am to mention a few developments with regards to crime, there has been a lot of reporting in many newspapers in the UK about the developments in Sweden. But the last month was the first month in many, many years with no shootings. Why? Because we have drastically increased punishments for gang-related crimes and for shootings. And we're looking to lower the age limit for legal liability. Why? Not because we're against youngsters, but because it has been this age limit has been abused by the gangs. They have recruited 13-year-olds to execute people because they knew that these 13-year-olds won't be punished. So we need to go after that. We have also looked into how can we break the power of clans, and one very important tool to do so is to ban and punish cousin marriages. Cousin marriages constitute a cornerstone of clan dominance in our segregated areas in Sweden. It's also very bad from a health policy perspective, and it's very oppressive from a gender equality perspective. So we're banning it, but in order to make it, actually forceful, we're imposing penalties on those enabling cousin marriages. With regards to migration, we see the lowest levels of asylum migration since this began to be estimated back in the 80s. And this is because we have lowered the pull factors. We have made permanent residence conditional. So the temporary residence has become the rule. We have shifted from a possibility to choose your municipality of housing to a focus on migrant centers. We are also looking at returns. We are increasing the payments to individuals that are returning to their countries of origin, raising the citizenship bar, and we also increase language and civics requirements. It's not fully enforced yet, but it's in the pipeline. So we're doing a whole lot of things, and anyone looking for office in the UK to actually start reforming your broken migration system is more than welcome to Stockholm, and we'll tell you a success story.
I just wonder, though, some of the measures that you have to implement in order to deal with this crime problem. I mean, a lot of the people that have come to Sweden will now be allowed to stay forever. They might become citizens, and your country will be forever changed in a way. I mean, you were famous for your punishment system being infamously lenient, and now you're having to lower the age of criminal responsibility. You're having to completely change the way your police operate. Do you think that those changes are permanent, or do you think Sweden can go back to being the high trust, peaceful society that we all knew? Or do you think it might be able to improve on where it's been, but it'll always slightly be different because of what's happened?
I mean, it's hurtful to admit, but Sweden will never become the very cohesive society it used to be. It won't. But it can be a much more cohesive society than today. It can become much more reminiscent of the Sweden that I grew up in. In order to get there, we need to continue on this path, and maybe in the future we will be able to relax some laws, but I do think that a functioning society needs to be tough on crime, no matter if the population is cohesive or not. Because let's be honest, if you're lenient with the perpetrator, you're punishing the victim. And I hope we never go back to the times when the political class was totally naive with regards to Islamism, with regards to different aspects of Islamization, when self-appointed moral police could patrol the streets in our immigrant suburbs outside Stockholm, Malmö, and Gothenburg, and basically imposing their views on people who lived there, harassing people who own dogs in those areas, harassing people who had the audacity to have a barbecue with pork or have a glass of red wine on their patio. I hope we never go back to those times when we financed Islamic schools run by associates of the Muslim Brotherhood and so on. Sweden has woken up for sure, but I do hope that we get back to a society which is much more cohesive. It won't be the same society as the one that I grew up in. I miss that society. It really breaks my heart that my daughters and my son will never experience the true sense of safety and security that you could feel in that society when you could let your 7-year-old walk to school by himself, when you could maybe have a few beers too much as a 15-year-old, and be picked up by the parents of your classmates rather than robbed by a gang. But by imposing policies that are tough on Islamists and hopefully purging a lot of them, sending them back to the Islamic world, and also deporting foreign criminals. I do hope that the Sweden of tomorrow will be much more reminiscent of the Sweden of yesterday than it is right now.
I think when Britain, when Britain decided to leave the EU, maybe they thought that we were ending all relations with this overarching technocratic structure. And we've just realised since we've left that they're always going to remain relevant to us, unfortunately. With the anti-establishment parties gaining ground in some of the most influential countries, France and Germany, what would a European Union with nationalist parties in control look like? Would it look like a European Union that we could work with a bit better on a fairer, more balanced, equal relationship?
Well, I think that we as national conservatives, we tend to respect the sovereignty of the UK much more than the EU centralists. I think we want a fair trade deal with the United Kingdom. We are not out to punish the UK for leaving the European Union, unlike a lot of bureaucrats over here. So that would pave the way for, I think, a better relationship between your country and the EU. I think that you've started to see some changes already now. I've talked about a stricter migration policy, but you also see that we're voting now, moving in the direction of deregulation in the European Union, and that is quite unprecedented. I think that we will go even more in that trajectory in the future, but what I do think is that the UK can be an inspiration for us as well, because the UK is no longer burdened by all the EU regulations, and you could actually revive industrial policy and your competitiveness in a way that would take much longer for the European Union. So what I do hope is that the UK is kickstarting some institutional competition to put pressure on the EU.
Thank you so much for your time. That was really interesting, and I'm sure that my viewers will find that really informative conversation.
Thank you so much.